This is maybe this has got, at least as of today, this is my favorite quote from the height of the revolution. And surprisingly, it comes from Alexander Hamilton. It'll change probably from day to day, but here's how he puts it. He says, before I conclude this part of my address, I will answer two very singular interrogatories proposed by the farmer. Can we think, says he, to threaten and bully and frighten the supreme government of the nation into a compliance with our demands? Can we expect to force submission to our peevish and petulant humors by exciting clamors and riots in England? So that was the argument. Like, can we even fathom this all-powerful, super rich mother country supreme government? Can we even think that we can force them to bend their knee to us? And that is the exact argument we get in response from people who don't want us to push forward with the Defend the Guard Act, restricting the use of National Guard troops in active duty combat without a declaration of war as required by the Constitution, declaration of war from Congress as required by the Constitution. They tell us, oh, what are you going to do? You think you can force them to change their national defense policy? No, that's not the case. What we're saying is we're not going to participate in this, and we're not going to just back down when you tell us everything that we're supposed to be doing. And that's what Alexander Hamilton, he said here as well. No, gentle sir, we neither desire nor endeavor to threaten, bully, or frighten any persons into a compliance with our demands. We have no peevish and petulant humors to be submitted to. All we aim at is to convince your high and mighty masters, the ministry, that we are not such asses as to let them ride us as they please.
As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, reported on Sunday that Israel has been creating kill zones in the Gaza Strip in areas where the Israeli military is operating. And the way these zones work is that anyone who enters will get shot, even if they are unarmed. The report said that anyone killed in a designated kill zone is labeled a terrorist, even if they never held a gun in their lives. And it also said that they are often civilians whose only crime was to cross an invisible line drawn by the IDF. One Israeli reservist who was recently in North Gaza said, quote, "The feeling we had was that there weren't really rules of engagement there," end quote. Other sources in the IDF told Haaretz that Israel's claim that 9,000 out of the 32,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza, and we know that 32,000 is a low estimate, but Israel's claiming that they killed 9,000 terrorists, but these IDF sources say that that is not a valid claim. One Israeli reserve officer said, quote, "In practice, a terrorist is anyone the IDF has killed in the areas in which its forces operate," end quote. A senior officer in Israel's Southern Command said, quote, "It was astonishing to hear the reports after every operation regarding how many terrorists were killed. You don't need to be a genius to realize that you don't have hundreds or dozens of armed men running through the streets of Khan Yunis or Jabalia fighting the IDF," end quote. So essentially what he's saying is that Hamas, they're not fighting in big groups. It's just a few at a time that they usually engage with. And another reserve officer who spoke with Haaretz said that he was tasked with telling senior IDF officers how many quote-unquote terrorists were killed in operations that his men carried out. And he said, quote, "No one can determine with certainty who is a terrorist and who was hit after entering the combat zone of an IDF force," end quote. So the Biden administration has approved billions of dollars worth of bombs and fighter jets for Israel to support the slaughter and starvation of Palestinians in Gaza, despite claims from U.S. officials that they are concerned about the massive civilian casualty rate. Excuse me. U.S. officials told the Washington Post that the administration approved the transfer of 500 MK-82 500-pound bombs and more than 1,800 MK-84 2,000-pound bombs. These are huge bombs, and Israel has used them to level entire city blocks and just is dropping them on civilian areas, and they're still sending them over. The administration has also approved the transfer of 25 F-35 fighter jets to Israel, a deal worth $2.5 billion. And this is likely being paid for by U.S. military aid to Israel. I know last year when they started moving this deal along, it said that it was being paid for with what they call the foreign military financing. Israel gets $3.3 billion of that each year from the U.S. And that's money the U.S. gives to foreign governments for them to buy American-made weapons. So U.S. officials said that both of these transfers, both the bombs and the fighter jets, they're saying they've already been approved by Congress, and that this is just fulfilling those deals. So the Congress was not notified. This wasn't made public. I mean, this is U.S. officials revealed it to media outlets, but there was no announcement from the Biden administration. They're trying to do this all under the table. So the death toll, the numbers from Gaza's health ministry on Sunday, they said 32,782 Palestinians have been killed and 75,298 have been wounded. And this is a low estimate. The total does not include the thousands of people who are estimated to be trapped under the rubble. The New York Times had an article the other day that said it was a few months ago, 7,000 people were missing, presumed dead, and that number has increased probably quite a bit. And also that number includes, the 32,000 includes over 13,000 children. And again, that's also probably on the low end. So as this, I mean, there's a lot to say about the U.S. sending these bombs and fighter jets. It's just unbelievable. So the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines will launch joint patrols in the South China Sea later this year in a move that is sure to escalate tensions with China. According to Politico, the joint patrols will be announced in April when President Biden will host Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. They're holding their first ever trilateral summit. So this is an example of the U.S. has been working to really bolster and strengthen its alliances with Japan and the Philippines as part of its strategy to prepare for a future war with China. And it has also been encouraging these countries to form their own military ties. And this is a big part of the plan when we talk about the U.S. military buildup in Asia, in the Asia Pacific. A big part of it is getting U.S. allies to cooperate, to form these anti-China alliances. Last year, the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines held their first trilateral maritime exercise in the South China Sea. So when we talk about joint patrols, this is different than just doing the exercises. Of course, the exercises are very provocative, too, because that usually involves live fire, missile drills, and things like that. But the patrols, it's basically just them kind of sailing around. And, when they do military drills, they where they're going to do them. When it comes to these patrols, it seems like they could go all over, and that, of course, increases the risk of an encounter with any Chinese ships. And there's been a lot of tense encounters that sometimes end in collision between Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard boats. So this is just adding to the risk of some sort of incident happening.
Live from Run Your Mouth World Headquarters, it's today's Run Your Mouth.
Guys, you thought global warming was a problem, and then turned out that maybe the pollutions were actually we're actually making it better because there might have been a cooling incident, or maybe that there's a thing with global dimming, or maybe the marginal harm of increased carbon after a certain threshold that's already naturally in the environment doesn't make a difference anyways. Listen, those were the old things to be afraid about. The new thing that you got to be afraid about is the fact that we're actually starting to spin too quickly. That's why I'm always pacing around like this. I'm getting ready for when the world's got to spin, and you got to try and keep your balance. You guys thought that this pacing was just chaotic and for no reason. No, I'm training. I'm training for a globe that's going to be spinning too fast, and the rest of you're not going to have the leg strength to try and stand still as you can. Melting polar ice is messing with global timekeeping. So much polar ice is melting, flowing toward the equator, that it is influencing how fast the Earth spins, complicating global timekeeping, Nature reported Wednesday. Are you guys starting to get panicked about this? We're spinning too fast, everybody. Who said what? Human-caused global warming is managing to actually measurably affect the rotation of the entire Earth. And that's kind of amazing, said study author Duncan Andrew, a geophysicist at UC San Diego Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Commentary. The Earth's rotation slowed for a long period, prompting authorities measuring time by the Earth's rotation astronomical time to add occasional leap seconds to sync up with coordinated universal time, the atomic clock base standard since the 1960s. CNN said, but now the planet is spinning faster. All right, what's next? The rotational changes won't make the Earth jerk to a halt, nor speed up so rapidly that everyone's flung into space, the Washington Post said, but the negative leap second will be a yikes moment for computer-based technology. Oh, guys, we're going back to the Y2K scam. This is fun. They're trying to come up with new things to get us all threatened about. So listen, you don't have to be nervous that we're going to spin so fast that we fall off the Earth, but computers that try and keep time and in their ability to keep their time are able to keep everything running. It's the Y2K thing. When the 12s and the zeros and the zero resets, every single computer is going to turn into a robot and try and kill you. That's what's going to happen. It's going to steal your semen and then kill you and then reinvigorate the Earth with our demon computer offspring. So, guys, just be on the lookout. If you weren't familiar with the fact that you had to be concerned with the Earth spinning faster, I'm just queuing you in on these things. Some states are wising up on Wednesday. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed bipartisan legislation to let police boot squatters immediately and apply criminal penalties for anyone presenting a fake lease or doing more than $1,000 in damage. Off the bat, sounds logical to me. Sounds like a reasonable policy. I don't understand why you'd be able to fake a lease and have that not be something that you would face criminal penalties for. Let's continue. On Tuesday, the Georgia legislature approved a bill criminalizing squatting. A Long Island state assemblyman has introduced anti-squatting legislation in New York. Numbers are hard to come by, but in a survey taken last fall of its members who own single-family rental homes, the NRHC found about 1,200 homes taken over by squatters in Atlanta. It was 475 in Dallas-Fort Worth and 125 in Orange County. Doesn't sound not substantial. Although I guess maybe this is a racket between lawyers where, you know, the lawyers who will actually show up and defend the squatters in court, maybe they get a payout from the lawyers that you have to hire in order to try and evict the squatters. And that's the way that this game is being played, just to ramp up some legal fees for everybody. And so this was in the New York Times. They were trying to showcase, hey, listen, we might not like Biden, but do you know how much people don't like the world leaders? It's actually normal not to like your world leaders. Nobody likes the world leaders. In fact, even though Joe Biden's disapproval rating is so high from a global perspective, he's actually on the lower end of disapproval ratings. This is like their new way of just messing with our heads and pretending like it's totally normal for there to be high. It's like, guys, world leaders have always been retarded. Do you guys not remember King Louis the Tard? The one that said, I like when my hair is shaped like titties. Do you guys not remember this guy? This is the new thing where they just try and sell us on, yeah, we've always had world leaders that couldn't talk, walk on steps, and seem to forget things. That was always the way it worked. This was also from the New York Times. I like their outlining of the issues that people are having with Joe Biden. And obviously one of the big one is inflation. And so let's see how the New York Times explained the United States inflation problem. Let's give this a read. The world has seen a sharp increase in prices over the past few years. As bad as inflation has been in the US, it has been worse in European countries, more directly affected by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Once again, guys, we have it good here. Our guy's only a little bit demented. You know how demented other world leaders are? Rising prices anger voters. Your hard-earned money is worth less. When prices rise, it feels like something is taken away from you. My colleague Jenna Samalik, who covers the U.S. economy, has said, and people direct much of that anger towards their leaders. People also don't like the solution to inflation. To slow price increases, central bankers have raised interest rates, but higher interest rates also make loans, credit card payments, and mortgages more expensive. This helps explain why people are so upset even as inflation has fallen. It's basically voters be like, hey, I thought I wasn't going to have to work. Yeah, weren't you guys saying something about us deserving free stuff? What happened to that free thing? I thought you guys said that things were going to be free. Now you're telling me that if you give it to me and it's free, things will cost more. And then if you make it that if the money I'm earning doesn't earn less, then I can't have as much free money. I don't like that at all. What happened to the free thing that you guys kept telling me about?
Yesterday in history, March 31st, 1774, the British Parliament passed the first of the coercive or intolerable acts. This was the Boston Port Act. And here from George Washington's Mount Vernon, they say the act authorized the Royal Navy to blockade Boston Harbor because, quote, the commerce of His Majesty's subjects cannot be safely carried on there. Of course, the blockade of the port was for safety. Government always tells us that when they shut down our ability to conduct business, to make our own personal choices, it's always to protect us. But really, for your safety has always meant so we can control you. And that's what they were doing by shutting down and blockading Boston Harbor. They write the blockade commenced on June 1st, 1774, effectively closing Boston's port to commercial traffic. Additionally, it forbade any exports to foreign ports or provinces. The only imports allowed were, of course, provisions for the British Army and necessary goods such as fuel and wheat. It sounds like the shutdown regime that all of us had to live through just in recent years. Now, this was a retaliation for the Boston Tea Party the previous year, which was a retaliation against the Tea Act of 1773, which was a response to the resistance to the Townshend duties of 1767. We can keep going back and back and back to the 7 Years' War, etc. Here again, they write, the act mandated that the port remain shuttered until Bostonians made restitution to the East India Company, the owners of the destroyed tea. The king had determined that the colony was able to obey British law, so just total obedience. You got to pay back these people. This is collective punishment as well. I will make a determination if you guys are sufficiently obedient, and that British goods once again could be traded in the harbor safely, always safely. Now, the First Continental Congress passed what we call an early Bill of Rights, the Declaration and Resolves of the First Continental Congress in October of 1774, and it starts out with this. Whereas, since the close of the last war, the British Parliament, claiming a power of right to bind the people of America by statutes in all cases whatsoever, hath in some acts expressly imposed taxes on them, and others, etc., etc. So what they are referencing here is the Declaratory Act of 1766, where the British claimed unlimited centralized power. The British Parliament claimed unlimited power in all cases whatsoever. This is the exact terms that they used, and they used this at the beginning of the Declaration Resolves of the First Continental Congress. So we know that everything else was an example of how they were trying to implement this unlimited power. So then they went through a list of colonial rights, a list of measures that they saw as unconstitutional. We know that there was an unwritten constitution, but they still considered measures unconstitutional. But anyways, they summed it up with this. To these grievous acts and measures, Americans cannot submit. So this is a serious line in the sand. They had a whole list of stuff, which also included the coercive acts, starting with the Boston Port Act, the first of them. And they said, we cannot submit to this. It's not like we might, but this is a no way. It cannot happen. And so they said, well, we may not be able to get from here to there in one fell swoop. So let's consider the strategy that we're going to use. They discussed this for days, of course. And they said, we have for the present. And I think this is an important point because a lot of times we take small steps forward. And we follow the advice of Thomas Jefferson, who told the Reverend Charles Clay in 1790 that the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. We must be contented to secure what we can get from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. Why? Jefferson told us that it takes time to convince people what is even for their own good. I think the British were like, oh man, they already resisted us against the Stamp Act and kind of won. We slapped back with this Declaratory Act, so we tried to put more taxes. And we tried some small ones. They also resisted that against the Townsend Acts. And then we tried again with tea. Then they resisted that. Then we shut down their port. Now they're all the colonies. It's not just those Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who, of course, we want to ship off to London and probably hang them for treason. It's all the colonies are joining in to resist us. Man, we got to do something. And I think that's the way the British approach this. So with these three key elements from, of all people, Alexander Hamilton, a young revolutionary, again, just to reiterate this. One, the necessity of the times requires it. And I think if we're thinking about basically all unconstitutional acts, they all set a precedent for more unconstitutional acts. We already live under the largest government in history. The necessity of the times requires some kind of strategy in opposition to basically anything and everything that they do. That's why I think sometimes it's so difficult, because it's so overwhelming, the tens of thousands of laws, rules, orders, and regulations that are on the books, and they keep adding to them. But as long as people keep using the federal government as the strategy to stop the federal government through courts and voting bums out and protests, the government's never going to stop doing this. That's a separate episode. So the necessity of the times requires something. It can't be the probable source, number two, of creating a greater evil. So does not complying with a bump stock ban make it worse than allowing them the power to actually ban another firearm accessory? Redefine the definition of a type of a firearm into something that they didn't have the authority to ban in the first place or restrict in the first place. Of course, it's much worse to allow them because, as we've seen in recent years, we should learn, well, of course, they tried to do the same thing on other stuff. They've been keep expanding this. And then it also has to have a probability and not just a possibility of success. So to say, oh, we're going to I don't know. I'm trying to think of some of the crazy things people have told us over and over and over. But if you just have to start thinking about, can we get a win on the board? It's essential to get some W's, especially in the situation that we face today. So how do you get there? How do we get from point A to point B? Is this practical, or are we just talking out of our asses?
Speaker Johnson announces innovations in U.S. aid package for Ukraine. Don't you love that word, innovations?
Yes. What they want to do is they want to loan the money. They want to loan the money to Ukraine because they're such a good place to loan the money. You're sure you're going to get the money. Wonder what interest they'll pay. That is so crazy.
You know what the interest is going to be is land for BlackRock. You know, all that fertile land. We'll take that over when you win.
Yeah, there you go.
But so yeah, I just love that use of the word innovations. It's like when they say innovations, grab your wallet because they're about to steal it. Well, let's go to the next one. Here's what he says. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, has said the U.S. aid package for Ukraine will include some important innovations, including the possibility of extending a U.S. loan to Ukraine. That is literally like someone coming to a bank without a job, without any money, without any collateral, with a heavy drug habit, who says, I need $1 million. And the bank's going to say, sure. Well, how much do you want? How about $2 million? Take what you want.
But there's another alternative. we on occasion borrow from countries that aren't willing, so we just take it.
Yeah.
It frees their capital and for years, like how we've stirred up a little problem in Iran over all these decades. But now people say, well, it's just sitting there. Now we're doing it. Why don't we use those things we stole from Russia? Yeah, that'll build up a good step in the right direction, building good relationship and try to avoid the next nuclear holocaust.
Yeah, they're desperate for the money, and you're right. They're looking at those seized assets. The problem, quote unquote, for Congress is only a small amount of that is in the U.S. Most of it is actually held by the Netherlands. The Netherlands, which has a worldwide economic footprint, if they steal Russia's money, they're going to have a big problem worldwide with the sovereign debt, with their own, economic interests worldwide.
We'll deal with that when we get to it.
Yeah, that's what they say. Yeah.
What a mess.
Well, put the next one on. Here's a quote from Johnson. So they're desperate because on the one hand, Trump is trying to get in office by saying not another penny for Ukraine, as we've reported here. But you have the Republican Party and people specifically like Johnson who wants to keep the war going, even though Ukraine is losing and will lose the war. Nothing will change. This money won't change anything. They still want to spend it. You know why? Because it's not for Ukraine. It's for their donors. It's for their donors.
Yeah, the money doesn't even go out of the country.
Yeah,
it doesn't go over there. It goes to some of those people that were your neighbors up there.
That's right.
Those houses that were, poor man's housing.
Yeah.
Oh, I work for this company that builds bombs.
Yeah. They get
well, you could
house.
deserve a big house then. I was always influenced by the book Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, and I keep seeing so many of them. And I see this, Easter was like the madness of crowds. Why do so many people go along with this stuff? And they do this, and they just don't seem to question it at all. And we have this Transgender Day of Visibility, and we have this wokeism, and we have people saying, this is a good day to release the people who invaded our country and all kinds of things. But I think it's the fact that people have lost an anchor, and it is, and politics is involved. Politics is probably the result of a philosophy that says, well, it's impossible to know the truth, and therefore we don't know if there's a superior being, and therefore we can do what we want. I was reading a little bit on Karl Marx, and the dictators generally, it was Stalin that was raised in a Christian religious home, and when he was late teens or in the 20s, he became an atheist. And I thought, well, then all of a sudden there has to be a relation on that, but because he was a very studious person, a good student, but unfortunately he took it from one category and put it over into this other category, and that is such a waste. And people go. What baffles me is, why do the people go along with this? And that's sort of the goal that we have here, is try to incite people to look at these things before we get into trouble. We don't have to wait until we have a war, and we've talked about coming wars 10 or 15 years before they happen. Then they say, how do we get out of Ukraine? Well, we're obligated now. We have a moral obligation. We've been in there a long time, and that means all the people that died in vain. Unfortunately, that's the case. So the sooner you quit it, the better. That was one of the arguments they gave me in the debate. Say, well, you can't quit. All the Americans who have already died in these wars would all be in vain. The only way you can make it where the people have not died in vain, the people that were involved, is to change our policy to the point where we prohibit that type of activity. The prohibitions to that type of warring activity is already established. We just ignore it. It's in our Constitution, and it's based on a moral issue that we shouldn't be starting wars. And unfortunately, if you look around the world in the last 20, 30 years, especially since World War II, we very much have been involved in all of those. And right today, just think of the propaganda driving the madness of crowds. Since the Ukrainian war started, they always represent in the media, Russia started it by the invasion of eastern Ukraine. At the same time, they say nothing about United States weaponry and the movement and the coup that occurred and endangered Russia. No, they ignored that. So we're looking for people who want to tell the truth, and sometimes it's hard to seek, but that when there is no truth, they fill it with a vacuum, and the vacuum right now is all this wokeism. And unfortunately, it will end badly, but in spite of all that, there are a lot of people. I bet you that there were quite a few wavering Christian or people that are concerned about what's going on and looked at all this nonsense. Hey, that's a little bit over the top, and maybe they will join us in this crusade for liberty.